Hello everyone and welcome back. Now that we have a user session, let's start using it to protect some of the data. We're going to make the lessons list only visible to logged in users. We will also talk about an ancient vulnerability called JSON hijacking. The lessons list data is loaded here via the load all lessons method at the level of the lesson service. So we are going to do a call to /API/lessons, we're going to do a get call, and this is going to return us a list with all the messages. Now, the first thing that we can see is that this is returning to us an array. This is actually a bad idea and we should not do this. We should always return an object instead for security reasons. This is to defend us against an attack which is known as a JSON hijacking attack. The problem is that this REST endpoint returns an array, and an array is a valid JavaScript file. So the content of this endpoint could potentially be loaded by a script tag. The problem is that the HTTP request that loads the script would send your session cookie to your server, and so the server would send back the data to a page under the attacker's control. There would be a way to extract the data from the runtime by overriding the JavaScript array constructor. This runtime vulnerability has been meanwhile fixed in modern browsers, so that is why we are not diving deeper into it in this course. The solution, however, is very simple. To avoid having this vulnerability in older browsers, we simply have to ensure that we return always an object from a REST API call instead of returning directly an array, like it's the case here. This would fix the issue because an object by itself is not a valid JavaScript program, so the browser would crash if we would try to load the content of the endpoint using a script tag. So this is very important, all REST API calls should always return an object. So let's quickly fix that first. We're going to be returning here an object with a property called lessons, and here at the level of the lesson service we are no longer receiving from the get call directly an array, so this would be an object instead. We're going to apply the map operator and we're going to take the response object that we receive and we are going to call the lessons property on it. While doing this mapping, we can see here that we get a compilation error. Property lessons does not exist on type object, which is by default the type returned by the get call. So we are going to, instead of defining a custom type just for the response, we are going to say that the response object here will be of type any instead, but we are still going to ensure type safety in the rest of the program by specifying that the return type of this function is an observable of lesson array. With this fix in place, we are now going to go back to the server, to the service that serves the list of lessons, and we are going to add some security to it. Right now, this service will always return the complete list of lessons independent of who makes the request, so it's publicly available data. Let's modify this implementation to return the data only to authenticated users. So in order to do that, the first thing that we need to do is to retrieve the session cookie from the cookies map, which is available here at the level of the request. Having the session ID, we now need to go to the session store and we need to find out if the session is valid or not. So we are going to define here a Boolean constant and we are going to call the session store. We are going to add a new method to it that we are going to call isSessionValid. To this method, we are going to pass in the session ID as the single argument. And now if we want to create the definition of this function based on this compilation error here, we are going to do Alt-Enter in WebStorm, create method isSessionValid. So this created the method, populated the parameter, and we are going to say that the session ID is a string and the method should return a Boolean value. As we can see, this logic would be very similar to this one, so let's do a little bit of refactoring. We're going to retrieve the session from the session map and we are going to return this directly as the result of the method. We are also going to refactor this function here, so instead of creating this local variable, we are going to call this method directly. We are going to do this.isSessionValid, and we are going to pass to it the session ID. So if the session is valid, we are going to retrieve the user data. Now that we have the information available about the validity of the session, here is how we are going to use it. We are going to check if the session is not valid, then we are going to immediately send back a response with an empty body, and we are going to send the status code 403 forbidden. So we are always going to send the same security related code independently of what happens on the backend. This is so that we don't give an attacker too much information. We will always return 403 in these cases, and in this case an empty response body. So this is what happens if the user is not authenticated. Now, if on the other hand the user does have a valid session, then we are going to do the same logic as before. We are going to return the status code 200, and we are going to return a JSON body containing the lessons data. Let's now test this logic to see if everything is working as expected. We are going to reload the browser. So as we can see, the lessons data is no longer being displayed, and that's because we have here no logged in user. So if we go to the sign up form and we create a user, we should now get the lessons data. Let's try this out by creating a new user. When we hit sign up, take a look. We have logged in the user because the logout button is now displaying, but if we head over to lessons, we now have again the lessons data. So we can confirm that this data is only being displayed to logged in users. Now if we want to test again the case where the user is logged out, we cannot yet log out. This logic is not implemented. But if we go here to the Chrome DevTools and we head over to the application tab, we can simulate a logout by clearing this cookie. So we are going to hit here the clear button. So now we don't have a session ID anymore. So if we refresh, we are going to get here at the level of the network tab, we are going to see here a failed HTTP request. Here at the level of the console, we have here the call to /API/lessons responded with status 403. So this is the correct logic. We just have to hide also this title here. So let's open the lessons component. We can navigate directly to it using Command-Shift-O. So here is the lessons component, and we're going to go directly to the template. And we're going to say that the whole component will only be shown if there is already some data to be displayed. So we're going to add here ngIf, and we are going to make sure that the user is correctly logged in. So let's go here to the lessons component. We are going to use the isLoggedIn observable that is already here available. We're going to apply the async pipe to it, and this will effectively hide everything, including the title, if the user is not yet logged in. Now notice that we did this last. If we would have done this first, there would be no actual security. So the actual security of the data comes from the protection that was implemented at the level of the server. Only an HTTP request with a valid session ID can access the data. That is the actual security of the data. This ngIf modification on the client side to hide the data is only for user experience reasons and does not ensure actual security of the data. Let's try this out. If we now reload the application, we can see that everything is hidden if the user is not logged in. If we head over to the sign up screen, let's now create a new user and click sign up. So as you can see, everything is working again as expected. The title is also hidden. So we have our sign up functionality up and running. Let's now continue implementing user management on the application. Let's implement the login and logout functionality.